Me. I think only one person does not know me here. I am a curator of exhibitions and public programming here at the Pushkin House, and we're very happy to welcome in this amazing weather of today Professor Maite Conde, who came to give us a talk from the University of Cambridge. She's a professor of Brazilian studies and the visual culture, author of several important publications on exploring the Portuguese culture and Brazilian culture in context of its relations with the, what is called the West. And today she actually will delve into a very interesting subject for us that appeared as an interesting idea in the conversation between me and Maite on the subject of Portuguese influence, of Portuguese influence and Portuguese presence in Mozambique. And this particular event falls into the strand of the Black Pushkin of our discursive programming. And that particular strand explores the Soviet relationships with the countries of the African continent and also influence of the Soviet Union on shaping the national identities and the horizons of perception of statehood, of national identity within the continent. And Maite today we'll speak about Tanzania and about Soviet influences in Tanzania through the medium of film and the visual culture. How does the visual culture forms this identity and forges the new nation statehoods as well? This is one of the many subjects we'll discuss today. Thank you so much for being with us, Maite, and without further ado, we'll start. For everyone who is watching us online, you should have the link of the film that we will be watching after Maite will first speak. And while we'll be watching the film here, you could just click on the link on YouTube and follow in the same timeline with us. So thank you so much.
Oh. Right, thank you, Denis, very much for inviting me to come here today, and thank you for being here. Right, in keeping, as Denis said, this is in keeping with the discursive strand of the Black Pushkin series. I'm going to look at the importance of film to histories of decolonisation, and going to do this with regards to the film that's going to screen, which is called Kuxa Kanema. It's directed by a Portuguese filmmaker, Margarida Cardoso. So before we watch it, I just wanted to kind of like run through things that I thought would be kind of like important, particularly contextually. It's a film that I actually saw in 2004, so just after it first came out, and it's kind of haunted me ever since. Normally I write on Brazil, and I work on Brazil, and so this is a detour. Because I'm delving into kind of Lusophone Africa, Mozambique specifically, and I'll talk about why I think this film has kind of haunted me. I'm going to start though by mentioning one of the first images, nothing to do with what you're looking at here, but it's one of the first images that appears in the film, which is the lowering of the Portuguese flag and the raising of the Mozambican flag, a new Mozambican flag, and it's a symbolic act of decolonisation. It marks the end of Portuguese colonial rule and the start of a new socialist government, the Frelimo government that was headed by Samora Machel. Now, what's significant about that act isn't the kind of flag raising or flag lowering at all, but for me what's significant is that it was captured on film. And it underlines and underscores something that's really important, which is the inextricability of film and nation formation, and particularly the socialist nation formation for the government, the new Frelimo government at that time. So when Mozambique gained its independence in 1975, one of the first cultural act was actually the founding of a National Film Institute, the INC, and the aim of that was to project a new Mozambican socialist identity, and to mobilize people around this kind of new nationalist politics, and also to teach them about transformations, to kind of put them into contact with other people around the globe. So cinema, the birth of cinema in Mozambique goes hand in hand with the birth of a new socialist nation. And it's something that this documentary that you're about to watch explores. It's that kind of inextricability. Now that link between kind of cinema and a socialist nation isn't new, and we're here in Pushkin House. So I need to mention Lenin, who thought that, who advocated for cinema and said that cinema was a kind of the kind of socialist art form. You know, in Soviet cinema in the 1920s produced works that consolidated a new tradition for the Soviet nation, either commemorating its historical traditions or imagining what the nation would be. So films like The End of St. Petersburg or The General Line. In Mozambique, film was very much conceived by this new regime, if you like, or the new government, as operating on the cultural front of decolonisation. It was born with independence. It's at the moment of independence that cinema kind of starts in Mozambique. And that's not to say that Mozambique didn't have any cinematic activities before. The Portuguese were actually the first people in the world to create propaganda movies. So the first propaganda movies started in 1908, and they were related to the Portuguese abroad, particularly in Mozambique. So these films, these Portuguese kind of propaganda films, would depict infrastructural developments, you know, new developments in transportation around the country, railways, basically showing how great colonialism was. Fantastic. Either to people in Mozambique or to people abroad, you know, who would see these films. It meant that film was really foreign. It was a foreign medium. The filmmakers were foreign. They're mainly Portuguese, kind of shipped in from Portugal. Filmmaking equipment was also shipped in as well. And local people didn't have access to cinema and didn't have any kind of knowledge of film at all. Films as well rarely depicted Mozambican or African culture. And if they did, it was to show its inferiority to the Portuguese. So when independence happened in '75, there were no production facilities in Mozambique. There was actually no one who could make cinema or who knew of cinema or about cinema. As I mentioned, that changed, and it changed really quickly after independence with the creation of this film institute, the INC, whose main objective was to develop a national cinema that could project a new Mozambican identity. Now that keyed into the revolutionary struggle at the time. It also keyed into cinematic practices elsewhere. So anti-colonial movements across Africa, but also elsewhere, meant that there was a militant kind of filmmaking movement that swept the globe in the 1960s, 70s, and then also the 80s. And it aimed to kind of use cinema to supplement revolutionary politics or implement it. And this became foundational to a movement in Latin America, which was Third Cinema, which advocated for cinema being a gun that could like forge the revolution. It was big in Africa, and people don't tend to kind of talk about these kind of this decolonial cinema in Africa, but you have people like Ousmane Sembène in Senegal, Tashomi Gabriel as well, who advocated for using cinema as a political tool to transform society. So film was meant to kind of construct a better society, and became the medium for doing that. So it became kind of a symbol and a symptom of this utopian future that could be constructed for people. Now the Soviet Union was part of this, and this is where these images come in. So these are of the Tashkent Festival of Asian and African Cinema, which began in 1968. So this is the opening of the image here is the opening of the festival in 1968, October 1968. And it began at 68, so just before Mozambique achieved independence, and it was kind of in the middle of its struggle for liberation. So Mozambicans didn't attend the event, but the discussion central to it, or a part of it, became really central to Mozambique and its kind of like cinematic landscape that come into being. Right, during the Tashkent Film Festival, filmmakers and critics would interact with each other and local audiences and Soviet hosts. They had conferences and round tables, which particularly discussed the cinema's political function. And these activities were all rooted in the belief in the power of international solidarity with film as the thing that could achieve that socialist kind of end. And now I'm going to mention this person here was an Uzbeki writer who opened the festival. His name is Sarvar Azimov. At the time, he was beginning to become involved in politics, wasn't yet, but then became like a diplomat for the Soviet Union in Lebanon and then Pakistan as well. Right, now that this opening, he referred to another event. So these are all images from Tashkent, which shows this kind of this unity of and inclusion of African and Asian nations. Sorry, listen. Oh, twice. Okay. Right, in that speech, the chairman references another event, which was this. This is the Afro-Asian Writers' Conference that took place also in Tashkent in 1958, so that's 10 years before. This is W.E. Du Bois, the African-American intellectual and civil rights campaigner, delivering the opening address there. And this is Efwa Theodora Sutherland, who's a Ghanaian writer and also activist. Right, there were other people as well that attended. So Senegalese novelist and filmmaker Ousmane Sembène was there, and the Mozambican revolutionary writer Marcelino dos Santos. Right, the conference, the Tashkent conference started to take, this writers' conference took place annually, but it traveled to different places, so like Cairo, Beirut, and so on. And that was similar to the Tashkent, the same year, 1958, there was actually a film festival, which was an accompaniment to this. And also kind of like, the idea was for that to travel. In '68, the Soviet Union decided that it should actually just permanently be in Tashkent. Now this says something about the importance of cinema for the Soviet Union and in this kind of formation of an international community and network. And I've got a clip actually of the 1958. This is the 1958. This is a
Welcome back to this
newsreel.
US Open office point.
Which Denis tells me it's in everything's in Uzbeki. But you can see that there's a screening of Asian films, and it's this coming together and a celebration of different people and cinematic cultures. So this was the first kind of Tashkent film event. And 10 years later, it became just consolidated in Tashkent. Right, so the question is why? Why is cinema so important? Firstly, as an industrial art, cinema symbolized technological progress and modernity, whose visibility internationally spoke to the success of a socialist modernity, an alternative to kind of capitalist modernity. Its collaborative mode of production was also seen as a model for collectivism, which socialism celebrated, and this was seen as a kind of a means of kind of experimenting with new economic organizations of labor, right? And its mass consumption made it ideal as well for kind of for disseminating new ideas, basically, about society and culture. Right, so the Tashkent Festival was therefore linked to kind of histories of international solidarities underpinning political commitments. It became an important node within a network of geopolitical alliances between the Soviet Union and the decolonial world. Now, geopolitics of the time was important to this, but there are also local conditions which extended beyond the Soviet Union, which were also important. Now, and they were particularly important for Mozambique. So participating in an international landscape was very important to Mozambique for breaking its previous kind of colonial isolation. Right, and the activities of the Film Institute that the Frelimo government founded in just after independence was very much international. If you remember, the country had no domestic cinema, so all of the films had to be shipped in from abroad, as they had been before, and they were primarily shipped in from the Soviet Union. So films from the Soviet Union were showed weekly. Filmmaking equipment was also donated by the Soviet Union, and this, you'll see this in the film that we're going to watch. Given the fact that no one had been making movies in the country as well, the Institute also drew on filmmakers from the Soviet Union and beyond. We'll see Godard kind of is another person who kind of went, and Jean Luc. But the Soviet Union also kind of sent people to educate Mozambicans in how to make films, the first Mozambican films. And so it basically trained the first Mozambican filmmakers. Right, so those films that were produced in Mozambique, those first kind of Mozambican films, were shown domestically, nationally around the country, but they were also shown internationally in order to get support for Mozambique's struggle, its anti-colonial struggle. So the INC, Mozambique's Film Institute, aligned itself with efforts around the world, and the Soviet Union was especially kind of foundational for that. Right, in terms of the films that they made, those kind of early films, they weren't story narrative films. They were all documentaries, and they were particularly kind of propagandistic films, just like the Portuguese. Ironically, they used the kind of Portuguese forms that they were familiar with. So the film camera was used to document the process of change and development underway, laying the foundations for this future socialist nation. And that was the basis of a film series called Kuxa Kanema, which roughly translates from Shangana as the birth of the image. And obviously this is the title for Cardoso's film. It's a series that started in 1978, and it went up until 1986, which is a key year geopolitically, which I'll come back to. But it was 10-minute short films, and each kind of film would show either a particular part of the country and the development that socialism was kind of bringing to Mozambique. Right, what was important though was not just what was shown, but how films were produced and how they were also developed and then exhibited. Right, and we'll see this in Cardoso's film. The series particularly highlighted collective methods of constructing the nation. So you'll see kind of like villagers carrying bricks to construct a hospital, all of them together, or or making new homes together. So you've got this emphasis on a communal labor that becomes mobilized in constructing the nation. These images of the people kind of coming together, standing for the revolutionary project itself, which is built on the collective labor of people. Now the screenings allowed Mozambicans to see film for the first time, many of them, never kind of been seen. And you'll see this in the film. It's just like this magical moment when people kind of see the moving pictures for the first time. It also allowed them to see themselves on the screen for the first time. So they're literally being drawn into the space of cinema and drawn into the space of the nation at the same time. As part of this, people also became involved in making films and making these documentaries, the Kuxa Kanema documentaries. So this is Godard kind of training someone to become involved in the production of these short documentaries. Now the films would be made collectively, so you'd have groups in small villages that would come together and they would decide what would be filmed, how it would be filmed. So there's a kind of incorporation of the people, and there's a practical element to that they wanted the films to be literate to a public that had never seen films before and couldn't read films. And methods of production are kind of long takes a part of that. So no kind of like experimentation, unlike Soviet cinema, so that it wouldn't be kind of confusing to people. And very minimal editing as well. So no drawing attention to kind of the method of construction. And the focus is very much on national development. In Cardoso's film as well, you'll see how in the Kuxa Kanema series, people often look directly at the camera. So they're clearly kind of comfortable with the camera, but they're also performing for it. So they're participating in the process of filmmaking and participating in the process of nation formation. So everyone, the film is kind of enacting a discourse of politics and socialist politics of this collective. But the series, though, as well as the people, also kind of focused really heavily on the president, Samora Machel. And he didn't just found the INC, he also ensured that every activity that he did, the camera captured it. So he became an important cinematic character, basically, in Mozambique, and particularly for the Kuxa Kanema series. Now, this helped to consolidate and establish the sovereignty of Mozambique through the projection of his presence. Right, so this is what Cardoso focuses on, this Kuxa Kanema series, which projected the triumph of the process of the revolution, and it inscribed the reality of the revolution within the process of filming, with the birth of cinema going hand in hand with the birth of Mozambique, this socialist nation. Now, in her film, what Cardoso does is take those 10-minute shorts together and constructs a 50-minute narrative film, and it tells the story of the birth of cinema and the birth of Mozambique. It also tells the story of the fall of cinema and the fall of Mozambique as well. And that started shortly after independence with the founding of a counter-revolutionary party or group called Renamo, which was a resistance to Frelimo, an anti-communist group funded by then Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa, and it began a civil war that ended only in 1992. As this intensified in the 1980s, the Mozambican government became extremely rigid and tethered to kind of like a party line. With Gorbachev's ascension to power as well, there was no more assistance to Mozambique. So complete shift in the country, which impacted its cinema. So there was, with cinema, there was less of a focus on national development and more of a focus on just surviving and the present. So Kuxa Kanema's activities, those films, moved from participating in developing a kind of new nation to just documenting the war, the civil war. So the camera withdraws from this active role. It no longer an agent of change and just kind of becomes a detached observer. And you'll see this in the film. There's one, and Cardoso actually kind of tries to communicate this. She kind of manipulates the film. You get a moment where there's complete slow motion, which is almost as if the kind of movement of, it's literally the cinematic movement stops, and it's almost registering also the halting of this historical moment as well, the kind of halting of history. And you've got extra diegetic, lots of music, which kind of takes over from the role of the camera. So it's almost as if she's documenting the kind of the death of cinema itself in forging a kind of new history. Now the shift that we see in Kuxa Kanema and that happened in Mozambique comes to a head in 1986 when Samora Machel mysteriously dies in a plane crash. And it's then that a new government headed by Joaquim Chissano takes over, or he becomes the president of Mozambique, and he begins to negotiate with Renamo. And with Perestroika, Mozambique agrees to the implementation of a structural adjustment program with the IMF and the World Bank. So state intervention declines, the state declines, private enterprise surfaces, and there's no more collective vision. And in 1990, the state renounces socialism. It also turns its back on cinema to focus on commercial television and particularly importing programs from abroad. With no financing, the INC is completely kind of abandoned, and in 1991 there's a fire at the archive and everything's almost destroyed. So that fire in 1991 marks the end of this decade of Mozambican cinema and how it was hoped to kind of construct a new nation. Now it's that rise and fall narrative of film and Mozambique that we're going to see in the film. Right, the film is therefore underpinned by this loss. It's actually very sad. It's a really sad film. And it's a loss that's concentrated in the present day, and it's a loss of the revolutionary spirit of nation building and also of filmmaking. And one that's been replaced by a new economic and media reality. So you'll see kind of a prevalence of television at the end, which is obviously an atomized form of watching media. So it's the end of this kind of collective vision of that film head. At that time as well, the Kuxa Kanema series is no longer in production, and the archive is deteriorating after the fire. With films that had previously been taken out into the public, just like now, kind of contained in these tiny canisters and cans. So Cardoso's film draws attention to the ending of a film era and also of a revolutionary era. And she shows us how the convergence between cinema and the political aspiration of decolonisation of the 60s, 70s and 80s has gone, basically. Right, in that context, the celluloid, Kuxa Kanema's celluloid, loses its immediate and future currency, and it just connotes the past, a history that's now dead. It becomes ruins, basically, of a past in a new historical and economic reality of international capitalism and a new commercial media landscape. However, even with that rise and fall narrative, the archive material that Cardoso uses isn't integrated into a whole, even though it's like a narrative, we've got a story, it's not kind of a coherent story, if you like, formally. The original footage that she uses from the past, which has been shot in black and white and on a Super 8 camera, is juxtaposed with contemporary interviews with filmmakers and directors from the INC, shot in the present day, as I mentioned, in color and on digital. So we have a compilation film which is constructed around a temporal and material gap or dislocation between the archival material of the past and contemporary digital filmmaking. In that way, she highlights this gap between, or a dislocation between then and now, raising questions about cinematic and historical time, both of which are interrelated in the film. Now, that dislocation would seem to suggest that the Kuxa Kanema series and films are relegated to a past, both historically and materially, becoming just traces of something from the past that's now dead. However, in the compilation film, those Kuxa Kanema films take on a kind of ghost-like presence. They actually, there's that haunting that unsettles the present digital era. This unsettling is the return for me of an unfulfilled historical project in the present day. And it's one that undermines, or at least allows us to glean a different history within the present day. In doing so, those films from the past assume a new significance that leads to a reassessment of their value as impressions of a revolutionary history, a belief in social transformation that was frustrated. Now, it's here, I think, that the specificity of film is important. And I think, yeah, I'm going to show this. These are some clips from the film. There's this obsession that she has with film, with actually showing the material of film, the materiality of it. You'll see it. There's like editing tables. She's often kind of like, you'll see splicing film together. Particularly at the beginning, you get to see this. So there's almost this obsession with the material film of the Super 8 film. And obviously this is something that you don't have with digital. For me, this is as if she's drawing attention to the index, the trace, the actual impression of the past on the physical medium of cinema. And it's this impression that returns to the historical consciousness of the present day. One of the filmmakers tells us that Kuxa Kanema and that the INC, which is linked to the socialist past, exists today without existing. So you've got this kind of dialectic of the past within the present that she's kind of drawing attention to. And for me, it's from this kind of index and this impression that we have on the materiality of film. So her compilation film, in this sense, allows for the archive footage, the original Kuxa Kanema series, as a document that's preserved traces of the past to find its place in the present and perhaps to kind of gesture towards a new direction in the future. So Kuxa Kanema carries in its material a delayed or frustrated promise that lies in wait for the future. And it's telling that the film, even though it ends with the kind of demise of everything, comes back, and the final scenes are of Samora Machel announcing "A luta continua," the struggle continues. So the film, even though it's very sad and emotional, it's not a nostalgic return to a past, to a utopian past. It's actually, for me, dealing or opening up questions of the future and of a responsibility for tomorrow. And all of that is contained in this compilation of the archive and the experience of it, which for me produces a kind of new promise and a new future. And that's that. Thank you.
Now we turn into watching the film. So for everyone online, just click on the link that you received on the email and try to do it right as we started. To do it now here, so we are all synced, because the questions and the conversations would be after. Okay.
Estas são as primeiras imagens de um país. Uma noite de chuva, uma bandeira que desce, outra toma o seu lugar. Depois de Estas são as primeiras imagens de um país. Uma noite de chuva, uma bandeira que desce, outra toma o seu lugar. Depois de 500 anos de colonialismo português e de 10 anos de luta de libertação, Moçambique é um dos últimos países africanos a tornar-se independente.
Moçambicanos, operários, camponeses, combatentes, povo moçambicano, em vosso nome, às 0 horas de hoje, 25 de junho de 1975, o Comitê Central da Frelimo proclama solenemente a independência total e completa de Moçambique, sua Constituição em República Popular de Moçambique.
A imagem tem um poder e o novo presidente Samora Machel tem consciência disso. Ele vai utilizá-la para construir a nova República Socialista. O primeiro ato cultural de governo da Frelimo é a criação do Instituto Nacional de Cinema, que vai produzir o Kuxa Kanema, um jornal cinematográfico semanal. Kuxa Kanema quer dizer o nascimento do cinema. O seu objetivo: filmar a imagem do povo e devolvê-la ao povo. Hoje, a República Popular de Moçambique passou a ser simplesmente a República de Moçambique. Da grande empresa que foi o Instituto Nacional de Cinema e que mobilizou mais de 250 pessoas, não sobra quase nada. Destruído por um fogo, só restam do edifício ruínas, salas e corredores abandonados, onde alguns funcionários esperam pacientemente a reforma. Aqui apodrecem lentamente as imagens que são o único testemunho dos 10 primeiros anos de independência, os anos da Revolução Socialista. Durante este tempo, e apesar das dificuldades e do conflito que se intensificava com a África do Sul e Rodésia, os cineastas do Instituto nunca pararam de filmar. Acreditavam, ainda, que um dia Moçambique poderia vir a ser um país diferente.
Isso aqui é um banco.
Quando esta bandeira subiu à meia-noite de 25 de junho, choramos de alegria. É ou não é? Por quê? Por causa da palmatória? Não. Por causa de cavalo-marinho? Não. Porque estávamos tristes? Não. Por quê? Por quê? Por quê? Por quê? Assim estamos livres. A coisa mais bela que há na vida de um homem é viver livre, é viver independente, é ou não é? Pode não ter comida, pode não ter roupa, mas é livre. É ou não é?
Eu fiz uma série de documentários com o Kuxa Kanema, com Samora. Eu fiz muito pouco naqueles filmes. Foi o Samora quem nos fez.
É ou não é?
Foi ele que ensinou as pessoas, com o cinema, ensinou as pessoas passo por passo o que era estar num país independente, o que era ter o seu próprio país, o que era nação. Foi o cinema que levou tudo isto.
Nascemos em maio deste ano. Com o Kuxa Kanema, o cinema em Moçambique entrou na batalha da informação, produzindo todas as semanas 10 minutos de notícias em imagens e sons. 8 cópias em 35mm correm as salas do país, enquanto o cinema móvel se propõe projetar as cópias de 16mm, onde salas de cinema não existem.
Nós estamos a pedir para vocês irem avisar os outros habitantes da aldeia que hoje à noite às 7h30 temos uma projeção de filmes. Então vocês vão ver, vocês a trabalharem com o camarada presidente. Hein? Vocês já ouviram falar de internacionalismo, não ouviram? Vocês já ouviram falar de solidariedade? Então esses carros que estão aqui foram oferecidos pelo povo da União Soviética.
Moçambique não há Maconde. Não há Macua. Não há Nhanja. Não há Jawa. Não há Ronga. O que há em Moçambique é moçambicano. Maconde comia Macua. Quando Macua comia Maconde, então o Porto comia os dois.
A atenção e o entusiasmo populares foram os mesmos onde as populações disseram o que queriam, onde o Presidente visitou a base aérea, onde se levam a cabo alguns dos mais importantes projetos e que defender.
O cinema nasceu com esta gente, com a gente que queria fazer coisas bonitas, ajudar a crescer o país e fundamentalmente passar da independência, do que é que queríamos fazer, as coisas bonitas que seriam a independência, isso fundamentalmente. E fizemos, e posso dizer que conseguimos fazer. Hoje as pessoas consideram que isso não era mais do que trabalho ideológico, mas que conseguimos passar essa mensagem da independência, da nação, da unidade. Conseguimos.
A República Popular de Moçambique fornece as armas para libertar o povo das grilhetas da opressão. A revolução é a ruptura. Modificar as condições de vida das massas trabalhadoras, edificar uma sociedade à altura do homem novo que é preciso erguer, significa reconstruir o país. É o grande vento que sopra neste primeiro ano de independência. O povo está mobilizado porque assume o verdadeiro sentido da sua luta. É ele quem vai construir o seu país. Desde a terra que se abre à estrutura que vai nascer, o povo fertiliza a liberdade.
Isto é meu. Fertilizar a liberdade. Naquela altura a Frelimo tinha fundado tudo, né? Tinha fundado o país, a África, o tempo novo, enfim. O mundo existia a partir da criação da Frelimo, era um pouco isto. E eu não tenho nada contra a Frelimo nesse aspecto, quer dizer, num aspecto de base era o que faltava. Depois o ideólogo da Frelimo dizia, isto é que é o socialismo científico e os aliados naturais do leste, quer dizer, isso era com eles. Connosco era esta partilha de mais igualdade entre as pessoas, não é? E de aprendizagem mútua. Porque foi um período riquíssimo, quer dizer, aprendemos todos uns dos outros uma data de coisas, não é? Isto era a sala de projeção lá de dentro do resto de chão. Eu sou do núcleo fundador do Instituto. O meu trabalho essencial era a escrita, não é? Digamos que roteirista, redator de textos para os documentários e para o Jornal de Atualidades, essas coisas, mas permanentemente discussão, quer dizer, porque ali confundiam-se os vários momentos, a cinefilia anterior, o momento revolucionário da altura, não é? E no fundo influenciávamos-nos uns aos outros. Quem sabia filmar, filmava, e, inclusive aquilo aconteciam coisas a cada minuto, não é? E era preciso filmar tudo e depois logo se via o que é que se fazia com aquilo, não é?
Luta do povo é justa. Mas a luta do povo é justa.
O colonial não deixava andarmos bem, só ele deixava nós viver como animal, só. É que eles gostavam. Agora somos quase todos o mesmo agora. Embora que não somos mesmo agora, o coração todo é a mesma coisa. Somos independentes.
E achamos que devíamos viver felizes todos, não é? Só que seria tudo ao contrário, não é? Eu lembro-me que na altura o António Quadros escreveu uma coisa muito bonita que se chamava Eu o Povo. Era a nossa Bíblia, quer dizer, era tudo bonito. Nós íamos domesticar os elefantes para ajudarem a construir estradas, nós íamos mudar o mundo.
Unidos trabalhadores do mundo inteiro,
Mas o mundo à volta de Moçambique não queria mudar. As primeiras imagens de otimismo sobrepõem-se das agressões violentas cometidas pela África do Sul e a Rodésia. A determinação do presidente Samora Machel em ajudar os movimentos independentistas e anti-apartheid representa uma ameaça para esses dois países.
Que lhe cabe enquanto membro da Organização das Nações Unidas e enquanto país confrontando geograficamente com os últimos bastiões do racismo em África. Não cederemos perante qualquer intimidação ou chantagem. Não cederemos perante qualquer agressão, por mais bárbara e cruel que ela seja.
Nós fomos para lá, assim, de urgência, e pensávamos que era mais um ataque. Pronto, era sempre chato, era sempre terrível, é evidente, mas um ataque, daqueles ataques que começavam a ser comuns rhodesianos, que se saldaria por, sei lá, 8, 10 mortes. Quando ao local é que tivemos a verdadeira dimensão do que isto era, não é? É um massacre terrível este. 800 mortes, pelo menos. Impressionou-nos de tal maneira que optámos por fazer um registro de imagem só, sem nenhum texto, sem nenhuma interferência que pudesse dar qualquer tipo de conteúdo ideológico à questão. Mostrar só o massacre em si.
Fala-se muito de que o cinema moçambicano foi utilizado como meio ideológico pelo partido. Os sul-africanos atacavam-nos aqui todos os dias. Eu vivo aqui neste país. Eu vou fazer filmes a favor dos sul-africanos, a favor do apartheid. Eu vou fazer filmes lutando contra o apartheid, denunciando aquilo. Agora, isso é a utilização do meio a favor de ideologias. Não é?
As agressões armadas ao nosso país fazem mal. Estas imagens mostram o estado em que ficou o hospital de Chioco depois do ataque covarde das tropas racistas.
O que significam todos estes crimes cometidos contra o povo moçambicano, contra a jovem República Popular de Moçambique? Significam que o regime de Ian Smith se encontra em guerra aberta contra Moçambique. Torna-se por isso cada vez mais necessário armar as classes sociais empenhadas na continuação do processo revolucionário, conduzindo a revolução ao seu triunfo.
Eu vim parar aqui de uma forma muito misteriosa. Estávamos em altura em que o país estava procurado de quadros, podia-se dizer quadros que vêm de diferentes facetas, né? Que representasse o país e como o país se liderava pelo campesinato operário. Então havia comissões que vinham nas escolas. Me disseram que íamos para trabalhar para uma coisa que era cinema. Cinema que eu sabia era ir sentar na cadeira, na plateia, ver o filme. E não sabia como é que aquilo se fazia, não sabia o que era. E eu só soube que ia trabalhar numa coisa que chamava som. Pouco a pouco eu fui me entusiasmando. Depois, no final, eu já trabalhava como chefe de estúdio de som e ao mesmo tempo formador.
Para vir ajudar o Instituto, o governo convida Rui Guerra a voltar ao seu país. Rui Guerra vive no Brasil há muito tempo e foi lá que se tornou um dos cineastas mais importantes da sua época.
Nós estamos numa fase que não havia nenhum quadros que soubessem fazer nada, né? Inclusive os futuros cineastas eram mandados para lá sem nenhum tipo de critério. Eram mandados como mandavam para uma fábrica de salsicha, para os caminhos de ferro. Eram designados e iam para lá aprender cinema. Então o que era importante naquele momento era nós criarmos uma base de autonomia de infraestrutura. E era também romper com o tabu da incapacidade de produzir filme. Não nos interessava muito ainda o aspecto daquilo que está sendo feito. O importante era fazer. O que fosse ali, cada vez que se arrancava 5 minutos de filme no mês, era uma vitória incrível.
De momento presente, todo o povo moçambicano encontra-se livre. Portanto, a escolha deve ser pelo próprio povo. Fátima Miss, presidente da aldeia Olumbe, camponesa. Nae, Ninkurima, aldeia Olumbe. Cartões contra a candidatura da camarada Fátima Amessi. Cartões contra. Ninguém. Aquele que está a favor, levante o seu cartão. Cartões que votam a favor, ao ar. Todos apoiamos.
Os imperialistas não suportam estas imagens. Eles não compreendem como os analfabetos podem exercer o poder. Eles não admitem que os explorados se possam organizar para acabar com a exploração. Eles não se conformam com o fim do roubo, da dominação, da opressão. É por isso que nos agridem.
Era um cinema sem preparação nenhuma, sem profissionalismo. Era um cinema de resposta, era um cinema improvisado, de resposta às necessidades dos políticos do momento. Portanto, qualquer reunião, qualquer acontecimento, nós éramos requisitados para filmar. E, simultaneamente, nós filmávamos e éramos formados por técnicos cooperantes de outras origens, como brasileiros, cubanos.
Depois de 11 meses de trabalho no Instituto Nacional de Cinema, este foi o momento de prestação de contas, quer para a equipa de 5 técnicos cubanos, quer para as quase 3 dezenas de trabalhadores que frequentaram os seus cursos.
Somos parte del internacionalismo proletario. Los pueblos como el de ustedes y el nuestro, cuando hacen una revolución genuina, donde el pueblo participa, estos son los resultados. Muchas gracias. Nosotros no es adiós, es hasta la victoria siempre.
Apesar de uma guerra cada vez mais presente, Moçambique continua a atrair cineastas estrangeiros. Godard vem a Moçambique e apresenta um projeto chamado Naissance de l'image d'une nation.
O Godard veio a Moçambique porque Moçambique era na verdade um país muito interessante. E vieram todos para cá e o projeto do Godard era isso, era fazermos um estudo, e aprendi bastante com ele, era fazermos um estudo sobre a relação do som e imagem com estas pessoas, com a população. Nunca ninguém tinha visto uma fotografia, nunca ninguém tinha o som do seu galo que canta lá na aldeia.
Conheci Godard por o seguinte: o único moçambicano naquela altura a ter uma câmera vídeo em Moçambique era eu. Essa é a compilação de tudo aquilo que andamos a fazer a partir do dia 24 de agosto de 68 até ao fim. Aqui estou eu. Eu entrei na Frelimo, na imagem, lá no mato, com 17 anos. Era preciso que o Godard tentasse nos instruir a nós e montarmos a futura televisão em Moçambique. Aqui fomos a Caju, filmamos, e para vermos a impressão da tirada da imagem, qual era a atração que havia nessa pessoa que não sabe ler e escrever. Então onde víamos que era preciso fazer a televisão para quem? Para o camponês ou para o intelectual? Em si, para toda a gente, como fazer?
A luta do povo é justa. A luta do povo é justa. A luta do povo é justa.
A ideia do Godard tinha a genialidade do Godard e a controvérsia do Godard. Ele quis fazer uma coisa que era montar em Lixinga, no Niassa, uma televisão, uma contra-televisão, onde ele levaria os meios, iria às aldeias, treinaria os camponeses a usar os meios e deixaria as empresas produzirem como quisessem. Extremamente maluca, digamos assim, entre aspas, ou pouco insólita, vamos dizer, e tive muita dificuldade. Não tive a dificuldade toda do mundo em fazer aprovar este projeto pelo governo, e o governo não aceitou este projeto.
Mas não era o tempo certo para levantar muitas questões, sobretudo sobre o poder da imagem. O projeto Godard é definitivamente abandonado. Imagens de mobilização, da vontade de um povo. Os jovens, os continuadores da revolução, esperam um futuro radioso. Mas a realidade é bem diferente. A guerra e o bloqueio dos países vizinhos arrastam Moçambique para a fome e a miséria. A ideologia reforça-se.
cinema should be an instrument for consolidating independence, for promoting national unity, and for the victory in the new struggle against underdevelopment. At the same time, cinema should play an important role in destroying the mentality which colonialism had instilled in the minds of our people through centuries, and an instrument for transmitting the new values of socialist revolution.
Eu encontrei havia na proposta política da Frelimo, havia uma teoria que me agradava e uma prática que eu questionava mais. Eu falei na altura com que era um dos grandes ideólogos do partido, que era, na altura era o ministro da Informação, que era o ministro Rebelo, e quando ele me propôs ficar lá, eu tive uma conversa muito aberta com ele e disse para ele: ministro, acontece o seguinte, se eu vier para aqui, vai acontecer inevitavelmente um choque entre certos dogmatismos políticos e propostas culturais. No processo revolucionário e um processo cultural existem sempre afrontamentos.
And that was the main objective of the creation of the ANC. And the big advantage of the creation of these states.
Pronto, isto é todo o jargão político da coisa, não é? Nós havíamos isto, eu não posso estar em desacordo que é preciso consolidar a unidade nacional, é tudo muito bom. Agora, diz-me disto tudo é depois, não, digamos, é um outro voo, não é? E era esse outro voo que no fundo nós queríamos também, não
é? Filmar a imagem do povo e devolvê-la novamente ao povo tem sido a principal preocupação do Kuxa Kanema, devido a um esforço de formação de quadros moçambicanos capazes de produzir filmes. Neste momento, o INC entrou para uma área de realização de filmes de ficção e o pessoal que faz estes filmes passou todo pelo Kuxa Kanema.
Eu penso que este festival demonstrou que há uma cinematografia moçambicana que começa...
Ficção não era de maneira nenhuma uma necessidade, não havia sequer um desígnio por parte do Departamento de Trabalho Ideológico naquela altura do partido de usar a ficção como um meio de propaganda ideológica.
Mas o poder é seduzido pela ideia de uma ficção sobre os atos gloriosos da Frelimo durante a guerra contra os portugueses. Os cineastas do Instituto têm direito a um novo voo, com uma condição, a de colaborarem com um país irmão.
Então os nossos companheiros jugoslavos convidaram a mim e o Patraquim para irmos para lá para continuar escrevendo o guião com o grande guionista deles. E depois de alguns dias chega o guionista e tal, está aqui o guião, o script está pronto. Está pronto? Sim. Podemos ler? Pode. Esse é o nosso script? Sim, o nosso script. A primeira sequência, sim, uma guerrilheira nua correndo pela floresta. 2 portugueses correndo atrás dela, comandos e tal. Aí ela de repente se lança-se num lago assim para nadar nua. E o outro, vou matá-la. Eu apaixonado por ela naqueles 30 segundos de filme correndo atrás daquela mulher no mato. A gente olhamos e tal. Pronto, continuamos a ler. De repente, o grande final. Então a Frelimo, com a sua força aérea, ataca, metralham aquele quartel, libertam o comandante. Nós dissemos, olha, desculpa lá, a Frelimo não tinha força aérea, isso era guerrilha. Como que ganhava dos portugueses se não tinham força aérea? O Tito tinha uma força aérea, por isso venceu a guerra contra os alemães. Não é a mesma situação, Europa e África, que os guerrilheiros caminham no mato. Não pode ser, assim não dá para fazer filme. Queremos helicópteros, no mínimo. Helicópteros da Frelimo atacaram o quartel português com uma cena forte. Não dá. Nem queremos a guerrilheira nua no começo, nem queremos helicópteros. É muito difícil, vocês são muito dogmáticos. Assim não dá para fazer cinema.
Arrase tudo! Destrua tudo, sem piedade!
queres que te matem a ti também? Já imaginaste que a vitória seria para eles se matassem um Pedro?
Quem diz isso? É minha Ana ou uma combatente da freguesia?
Isso foi um processo interessante porque deu muita polémica com os jugoslavos, deu muita polémica com a própria Frelimo. Não era este filme que nós queríamos fazer, este manicaísmo da mulher e dos pretos e dos brancos, quer dizer, esta coisa meio saródia que este filme tem, não era a nossa ideia, nada disto, né? Nem pouco mais ou menos.
E as orientações que nós tínhamos é que meninos, cinema de autor, cinema de ficção, nem pensar. Mas eu tentei fazer um guião com as recordações que eu tinha do tempo colonial e também, por que não dizê-lo, escolhi esse tema porque interessava aos políticos da altura.
A casa do menino.
A minha aposta era que esse filme devia ser um filme totalmente moçambicano.
O Centro Associativo para os Negros Assimilados, a Associação Africana para os Mulatos de Segunda e o Atlético para os Mulatos de Primeira. Não há dúvida que nesse aspecto o colonialismo venceu, pá.
Enquanto estivermos assim divididos, somos fracos e continuamos a ser explorados e manobrados à vontade.
E eles estão sempre a dizer, em Moçambique somos todos portugueses e com os mesmos direitos.
Mas olha lá, sentes português?
Eu? Não me lixes, pá.
O Vento Sopra do Norte é o último filme de ficção produzido pelo Instituto. O conflito com a África do Sul tomou agora a forma de uma guerra civil que arrasta todo o país para a violência e o horror. O cinema não encontra outro espaço senão na representação da guerra.
Independência ou morte! Independência ou morte! Viva a República Popular de Moçambique! Viva a República Popular de Moçambique! Trabalho contra todas as ações do inimigo vocês fizeram. O inimigo maltratou, bateu muitos de vocês. Muitos de nós foram mortos pelos bandidos armados. Muitos de nós foram presos. Muitos também conseguiram fugir, abandonar os bandidos armados. E por isso nós saudamos a vocês. A vossa determinação de sempre, seja qual for a dificuldade, lutar contra o bandido armado.
A 5 de setembro de 1983, os bandidos armados atacaram a vila de Maringua, na província de Sofala, e destruíram tudo. É aqui que vem Marcelino dos Santos, dirigente de Sofala, para saudar a população mártir que sofreu o cativeiro, viu a morte e enfrenta agora a fome terrível. Os bandidos armados levaram tudo e ficámos sem comer. Conta Chica Midio. Se tentássemos procurar uma explicação, eles batiam-nos. Levaram as meninas para o mato, as nossas filhas e sobrinhas, para manterem relações sexuais com elas. Esta representação teatral é um pouco a cultura combatente e a dureza das situações vividas fez criação e testemunho.
Eu entrei no Instituto de Cinema já em 1984
84 já era uma época diferente no país, portanto, enquanto que na primeira época, logo após as pessoas, todo um entusiasmo e as pessoas acreditavam no esforço e valia a pena o trabalho e tudo isso fazia parte de um contexto em que as pessoas estavam a trabalhar para o desenvolvimento de um país que era o seu e para o crescimento e para o aparecimento de uma nação que nós acreditávamos que seria diferente das outras, não sei porquê, mas acreditávamos. Naquela altura já não, era uma altura já de desilusão, a guerra estava a marcar o dia-a-dia de toda a gente de uma forma muito violenta. O trabalho do Kuxa Kanema era mostrar que existia uma guerra, que existia um grupo que na altura era chamado de bandidos armados, que estavam a promover essa guerra, portanto tendo a África do Sul por detrás.
Alunos da Escola Industrial 1º de Maio e do Instituto Comercial reuniram-se no terreiro da escola para ouvirem de viva voz aquilo que faz correr os bandidos armados. A iniciativa foi do Comitê do Partido na cidade de Maputo, que já promoveu outros encontros do género e insere-se no quadro da educação patriótica do povo e da juventude.
Qual era o vosso objetivo? De violar menores, roubar os bens da população?
Este bandido disse que o seu comandante lhe confidenciara que as armas começavam a faltar nas suas fileiras e que eles lutavam contra o socialismo. Mas os seus alvos são o povo e aquilo que o povo constrói.
Tudo quanto se dissesse devia estar, portanto, de acordo com um discurso que era um discurso, no fundo, de uma situação de guerra. Portanto, ou tu estavas pró ou tu estavas contra. Não havia meio termo no meio disso. Portanto, isto refletia-se no trabalho que nós fazíamos, porque tudo quanto nós encontrávamos tinha que caber dentro deste relato bipolar, digamos, e isso obrigava a que o discurso fosse cada vez mais repetitivo, cada vez mais o mesmo e cada vez mais sem sentido.
Estes quem são? Criminosos. Digam lá, criminosos. Estes criminosos, estes marginais, estes antissociais, simplesmente gatilhos só. São gatilhos só. Bandidos armados, ladrões armados.
O Tenente-General Sebastião Marcos Mabote dirigiu em Magul um comício com as populações, onde foram apresentados 16 bandidos capturados pelas nossas forças. Os crimes deles já conhecemos. Sabem isso, não sabem?
Bandas arrumadas! Bandas arrumadas!
Ninguém tinha a dizer, nem havia sequer institucionalmente isso, nenhuma espécie de comissão de censura, nem nada desse género, nem sequer nenhum comissário político ia objetivamente lá dizer, olha, isto não era isso. Agora, era todo um clima que se criava, linguagens subliminares, gestos, semióticas, valores, enfim, este caule ideológico todo, que levava com que as pessoas, no fundo, se autocensurassem, não é? E isso era mau, era terrível, E depois com esta não correspondência já entre o que era do plano da realidade e o que era do plano do discurso. O discurso institucional oficializado, teoricamente revolucionário, já não era revolucionário, era conservador e não tinha nenhuma correspondência com o que era a realidade, não é?
Empunhando a bandeira da esperança está o soldado. É a confiança no exército que faz milhares de camponeses fugirem das mãos dos bandidos e buscarem refúgio junto à Frelimo. Os soldados do povo operam em toda a mata da Zambésia. As operações de busca e captura dos bandidos armados são cotidianas. Jovens que aceitam o mais alto dos sacrifícios defendem a pátria de armas na mão. Eles são a esperança de paz.
Portanto, já não saíamos para filmar, íamos em coluna militar. Quando não íamos em coluna militar, íamos em risco de emboscada a qualquer momento. Portanto, era de facto uma situação muito difícil. E em termos a todos os níveis, quer dizer, cada vez que nós saíamos para filmar num sítio desses, era uma situação tão terrível e tão humanamente violenta que tu não te davas conta sequer de que aquilo que estavas a ver era real. Portanto, era quase como se aquilo que nós estivéssemos a ver fosse o filme e não a realidade, porque de outra maneira não era possível suportar.
Em 1986, Moçambique é considerado o país mais pobre do mundo. O conflito com a África do Sul atinge o seu auge. Nas cidades, a maior parte das salas estão destruídas e o cinema móvel só consegue projetar nos arredores da capital. Amputado da sua função principal, que era a de ser visto pelo povo e cada vez mais fechado numa lógica de propaganda, o cinema afunda-se, pouco a pouco, com os sonhos da independência. Em outubro desse ano, africana, o presidente Samora Machel pede ajuda à comunidade internacional. Alguns dias mais tarde, de regresso de uma conferência na Zâmbia, o avião presidencial desvia-se estranhamente da sua rota.
Fazia sentido nesse dia alguém estar noutro sítio que não fosse atrás de uma câmara e a filmar aquilo que estava a acontecer, porque todos nós tínhamos a sensação de que era alguma coisa completamente era de facto o fim de uma etapa e não percebíamos ainda bem qual era o sentido disso, percebemos depois, mas sabíamos que esse sonho de país acabava ali.
Esse grupo de cinema moçambicano está muito ligado àquilo que foi a história política do país também. Quando isso falha, digamos, quando a Primeira República cai, e simbolicamente isso acontece com a morte de Samora, né? Os 6 anos sobem ao poder, mas tudo aquilo já é outra coisa. Entretanto, a televisão também já tinha entrado. Digamos, o produtor-Estado percebe que para reproduzir a sua imagem, a sua linha de política ou para fazer a sua propaganda, tinha à sua escolha mais meios do que só o cinema ou o jornal de atualidades, não é?
O que se passa no edifício é exatamente a imagem do país. No fundo, as paredes estão lá, o edifício está lá, os filmes estão lá, melhor ou pior, guardados dentro das mesmas latas, com os mesmos rótulos, no mesmo armazém, etc. É uma coisa que existe sem existir. E então isso dá uma sensação, assim, uma angústia muito estranha. Quer dizer, tudo aquilo que se fez, mas também não existe.
Depois da morte de Samora Machel, a guerra durou mais de 6 anos, até 1992. Hoje, por todo o país, vários canais de televisão transmitem a imagem de um sonho que o povo jamais poderá alcançar. Privado da sua própria imagem e o seu presente. Outro sonho. O sonho de um país diferente. Já ninguém fala.
Obrigado, amigo.
Just questions. Let's maybe open the windows. Yeah, it indeed ends on a very somber note.
But they're not. No, with him.
Yeah, but with
then there's something like really
with
nice.
With him appearing in the end. Yeah. Well, looking also at the and looking at the description of the film before the event as well. One thought also passed through my mind. Venice Biennial just opened, 2 weeks ago, and Russia this year gave its pavilion to Bolivia. I don't know if you heard of it.
No, I didn't know that.
So Russian pavilion was shut during the 2 consecutive biennials for obvious reasons. But currently, there is a Bolivian project being presented in the Russian pavilion, and the title of the project is the Lost Past Futures, and it's a decolonial project that shows the consequences of colonial exploitation of both Bolivian land and also Bolivia as a failed nation due to the colonialism. So I would start with that maybe to connect the context of the film and also the investment into this Mozambican dream by the collective of the filmmakers as well, and by the support of the Soviet Union, to connect it to what is happening maybe now with the neocolonial practices.
Yeah,
I don't really have a particular question, but it just sort of came through my mind while I was watching the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is 2003. So, I mean, it's the new millennium now. It's the 21st century, and I think there's 2 things. One is like, what will the future bring politically for Mozambique and kind of politically, for the world, I guess. But cinema. It was very much, there were discussions about cinema. It was the kind of, I mean, I work a lot on early cinema. There was lots of work kind of going back to that period, trying to kind of figure out, the hope of cinema at the beginning of the, in the 1890s and at the beginning of the 20th century, and the kind of promise and hope of the medium, and that it was mirrored in the 1960s, very much in this kind of political avant-garde, and that decolonial moment where cinema became fused with constructing a new period. And I think for Cardoso, I don't think it's a coincidence that she's making the film at the beginning of the 21st century, which is when questions of what does the future bring, and particularly questions about what is the future of film and audiovisual media now in a landscape where people are not going to the cinema as much. Those images of people watching collectively are in public spaces, this creation of a public space, and at the end we see that that's completely lost, very much kind of like internal spaces, apartments, no one is kind of there. So I think that contextually the 2000s is really where I would kind of like situate her concerns, and I think what she's responding to. Today I didn't know this about Bolivia and the Soviet Union, which is crazy.
And in a sense of this image of the construction, also the function of the film constructing the reality, do you think that still, that medium still possess this world-making agency and capacity?
Well, I think the film registers the loss. There's something, the female INC member there, she says, no, it's kind of, someone says, we believed. I don't know why, we just believed. And there is something very religious, about the veneration of Machel. And then it's kind of like, there's that loss of faith, and that becomes registered, and they all kind of document that, and it's a... Yeah. Yeah. It's weird though, no, because you also go through there's the kind of loss of the nation. There's two scenes of people dancing. There's the first scene, which is really kind of jubilant, and it's just like so lovely. Everyone, the same steps, and, and they're singing in Ronga. And then the second one is where they're in military uniform. And there's a authoritarianism that kind of takes over. So that kind of political moment of the 50s, 60s and 70s ends with extreme capitalism, but also authoritarianism. Latin America, it's the coups. And here, the images have become very kind of authoritarian. Where the filmmaker talks about that, there was never censorship, but there kind of was. And so there's a loss it's gradual, but there's a loss of that kind of like spontaneity, which they're all talking about, which is everyone coming together, constructing, and then a kind of like hard line, and things have to be followed. And that becomes devastating. And it's funny. I don't know. When I see that ending with him, struggle continues. It probably says much about me, but it just fills me with this kind of like yes.
That maybe was her intention to emphasize that.
I think so. I think there's something that
despite the rotting film, the message of the existent documentation of the project in itself, not even the wholeness of the project makes sense, but the intention is still there, which is sort of very, very much of a unique revolutionary idea in a way, and very radically democratic idea, like that scene where the villagers are holding the cards at the voting. It really, you could only see something like that happening in Switzerland right now, in semi-cantons, basically voting for something. But imagining that something like that is happening in the course of the nation building is very interesting, I think. No, and it's when she says, it exists without existing. And I think that she's talking about films, the films, and that they haven't been burnt, and so they exist, but they kind of don't, they're all in these cans. But then but it's also the politics, kind of like that exists without existing. It never came, it was never materialized, because it became something completely different. It's sort of ontological a little bit. It's very Derridian, the whole film. It's almost sort of like penetrated with ghosts of something that was not meant to happen. or happened but would not be would never be any more known because of the this presence of material that's not able to speak in any formal way.
No, and I think, and also him, there's this, that religiosity is important in the Derridian sense. There's a messianicity.
Any questions from you guys?
Thank you, Maite. I wanted to ask you about, really, there seems to be a valorization of film, almost, and is it really fulfilling its ambitions in its early period? I mean, who has access to film? You describe it as this like collective viewing, very, positive, cathartic almost thing, but, who really has access to seeing these films? And I mean, by the end you get the sense that it's just an archive that exists on its own, full of failed promises. But in the early period, I think the 70s, right? Is it really that, what can you talk about reception, essentially?
Well, they, I forgot to mention, they had the mobile cinemas. So you had the vans. They had this in Cuba. It's like the agitprop trains. And so the mobile units would go around the country and stop and film somewhere, but then in dialogue with the people in the town. And then they would, you see it, how they're kind of like loading up the projector, and then they would project the films to the people in public spaces. So the idea was to disseminate film. It's free to make films in different parts of the country, so to disseminate the medium, and show those films that were made in one village in another one, and also interactively. So that kind of spontaneity was part of the filmmaking process as well. And so the idea of who has access to film, I think was at the forefront of that. Who has access, who can make, the whole training people to the sound engineer. I didn't even know what sound was here, and then suddenly he's a sound engineer. So training people as well in film. I think the Godard story is significant in this. Now that he wants this TV, he wants to take it one step further and have television. And they say no. And I think it's that there's a moment that...
It only seemed, it almost seemed like a climax of the whole project.
Yeah.
Of the Godard potential intervention into making it, into going it way beyond of the initial ambition. And it was also about mobile units. It was mentioned right in the end that by the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, the mobile units were already only operating next to the capital and were only projecting propaganda. So it was also quite clear that the film indicated the conversion of that project into something completely else in the end, and sort of archiving that initial intention of it and sort of forgetting about it.
It's quite. You read the Godard that they kind of. She shows it in a kind of nice way. It was really fractious. The relationship was bad. It came they really kind of hated each other. So I think that moment it's precisely the question. I think what the INC and what the government were doing at the beginning, and it's canny. Samora Machel, very kind of intelligent, knew precisely, and I think this is really new from the Portuguese and how they used film, the power of the moving image. And I think that question of who has access, who can have access to it, who can make it, was at the forefront of that. And then it's a complete failure. And the film is about failure and loss. Completely, yeah.
Thank you for bringing this in front of us. I would have never seen it otherwise, I guess. I do have you say it describes a failure of sorts. I guess I wonder what the maker is trying to say as there are external circumstances that are almost depicted as at least the catalyst of the failure. But do you think what's the causality? Do you think that the cinematic approach here failed because the circumstances just became unattainable, or was it more something else that was intrinsic to that approach?
To the project itself?
Yeah.
Was, I don't know, it's never struck me before, but today it did seem kind of a bit, I don't know, naive, is that like, yeah, which is really bad. But no, I mean, there were kind of practical material impediments to the project. There is, in terms of, to the cinematic project, no, there's something about, we see Machel at one point, this is thinking politically, and it's all about the collective. And, you know, and at one point he's saying, in Mozambique, there's no Ronga, there's no Shangana, there's no Makue, so he goes through all the different languages. And it's to construct this collective. Now, that within the Civil War, that became very bad because it created divisions, internal divisions that were then manipulated by Henam or by Frelimo. You know, what seems to happen here and what she seems to depict is just the Henamo atrocities, but, you know, Frelimo was not, you know, immune to atrocities either. So I think that's the kind of political it's almost like the construction of a collective was also something that contributed to the demise politically, those internal divisions that were then kind of manipulated. Cinematically, I mean, yeah, I do think materially, I also think that hard line, you know, rather than that spontaneity that you get, I think that's why that scene is so beautiful when they're dancing. It's this kind of spontaneity when they all come together. It's, you know, it's rehearsed but kind of not. And that becoming, you know, that ends. And it ends cinematically that, you know, there isn't any self-censorship, but there is, you know, there's no kind of freedom or spontaneity. So, yeah.
Actually, two questions. One for you, Denise. I was just wondering, you said that Russia gave the pavilion to Bolivia because of the Soviet Union exploitation of the Bolivian land? Or?
No, it's just a geopolitical
pan.
Geopolitical pan of Russia to do something better than just close the pavilion. But it's just an interesting gesture again to emphasize that connection to the legacy of the Soviet Union as a supporter of the anti-colonial struggle, while Russia itself now in the recolonizing of war, basically. That's what sort of just the parallel that.
Sorry, I just got confused. Yeah, I was just wondering about sort of any other projects or films that was related around the same time in Mozambique, if you know, because if you know, I'm saying in the context of like not political or like sort of the attempt of the Mozambique having socialism, I guess in a way, communism, and then failing at that. It's like, it feels like almost that at times you kind of, it feels like you're always sort of the outside viewer when you see those images. Like I kind of, as a viewer, missed a little bit sort of getting to know more about what the dreams and watching those films were for the people, like just sort of that kind of aspect, or like sort of just the perspective as a sort of decolonial part of the route. Yeah, I was just wondering if it sort of was like something else as a voice based on that.
I was just thinking, no, because for me it's like this landscape of this other internationalism is what really fascinates me. And here you get Cuba and Brazil. So do you mean contemporary to which contemporary?
I don't know
which
much
time?
Contemporary, but more like, you know, sort of the
today, or
just sort of at any time where you sort of kind of get the perspective more, because I think most of the filmmakers, or some trained from the local peoples, but some were, I guess, Portuguese, right? Or like sort of, and I was just wondering the reaction of the audience as well, if that was sort of like captured, or if there was like complete amateurs, like you have different amateurs clubs as well around like the Middle East or like the UK, sort of that.
So dissemination beyond
yeah,
Mozambique.
Like kind of
okay.
just
Yeah.
no, like more like just the perspective of the audience from the Mozambique. If that makes sense. Yeah. The locals who are watching the movies.
Yeah. But they've appeared, haven't they?
Yeah. Oh no, I meant like something beyond than just what was in there.
How were the films received beyond?
Yeah.
Oh, right. The Kuxa Kanema series.
I also wanted to add that I really liked your intro.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really sort of very helpful for the movies who sort of can navigate it better.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The Kuxa Kanema series was a big hit, but I mean, it's not that there was anything that you know, people that there wasn't much else. There wasn't much else to watch, but it was really well received. You have to remember, film is new, so you know, and I think that you get that. You know, you get this kind of like that. Wow, like the first time of seeing the moving image. And so there's a fascination, also a fascination with seeing some of the, like, with what they were seeing. You know, black people for the first time and seeing each other represented, the country represented. I mean, that was brand new. I mean, it's important to say that the films, not Kuxa Kanema, but some of the films they made, not that fiction film, which is like so bad, hilarious, did circulate. And they circulated internationally, and they were circulated internationally to try and get money for the war, for the civil war, and get people on board Mozambique. And this is where the question of like censorship or self-censorship becomes important. That there's only there has to be a particular way of projecting what's happening, with a view to having help internationally. So that international gaze, if you like, becomes really much more important afterwards, once the civil war starts. So those images become kind of mediated by an external gaze, whereas I think at the beginning of the revolution, they hadn't been. It was very much about kind of like, well, they were too. It's kind of like, look how wonderful we are, but very much with a view to constructing Mozambique. Remember, there are so many different languages, different areas, and the Portuguese had never bothered. I mean, literally, it was an extractive form of colonialism. There was never any kind of construction of a Mozambicanness. And so what the films and Machel were doing was to construct a Mozambicanness. And that's, I think, where the mobile film units are really important.
Hello. Oh, it is. Sorry. Hi, sorry. I want to say, your talk at the beginning was so good in kind of orientating the film. Obviously, I don't really know anything about it coming in, so I think it's really good. But I didn't I didn't think the film worked. I think, so you begin with the idea, which is incredible, of Kuxa Kanema, so the birth of cinema, riding pillion to the birth of nationhood. That's incredible. So the actual, like, the story and the narrative, or the history rather, it's not a narrative, is good, but then I think the whole film falls short in this kind of pursuit of reflexivity. Doesn't it kind of show that there's still so much colonial influence, to the point that you have this woman, sorry, I sound really annoyed, but I'm not annoyed, saying that the atrocities she saw were like a film. It's not a film. So then why is she saying that? And then later she's saying it exists and she doesn't exist, as if it's some like another academic example of using kind of vapid oxymorons to kind of not really say anything and not reveal truth. So on the one hand, you have these amazing vignettes of reflecting society at a very much a needed time, at a time where cinema is not just an artifact, but also entertainment. You have the liberation with Soviet intervention, which obviously potentially you could tie to notions of like Kino Pravda in the 20s and the importance of that as showing actuality, which can lead to reality as well. So I think, my question is, A, do you think the actual clips, the original clips, were successful in kind of maybe moving more away from propaganda, or do you think it still fits within the remit of that, despite being liberation cinema? And B, do you think the film itself, made by a Portuguese, is she an academic or a Portuguese independent filmmaker? I'm sure she's lovely. Do you think she's successful in showing the struggle of Mozambique, or just showing the struggle of Portuguese meddling in Mozambique's business, essentially?
Yeah, she was born in Mozambique. With independence in '75, you had something called retornados. So they had Portuguese, basically the Portuguese were expelled and they had to all left. And so her family were one of those. So there's a kind of link, and most of her work kind of deals with Mozambique. I don't know if nostalgically is a good word, but it deals with Mozambique, and I think there's a kind of personal connection there. This for me is about filmmaking, and you mentioned kind of there's a self-reflexivity, which is actually quite unusual in documentary film, to reflect on film and the filmmaking process. And I think that's what the film, and it's right at the beginning. Right at the beginning, you've got the editing table, and it's almost exaggerated, you know. I mean, there's a pedagogical dimension to all of this, no? Not just here, but also kind of to decolonial cinema was very pedagogical. I mean, the idea is that there's...
was Paulo Freire problematic in that sense? He was educating. It's just,
you know, showing you how oppressed you are. There's a filmmaker, I mentioned Third Cinema. There's a Brazilian filmmaker, you know, at that moment, everyone was writing film manifestos in the late 50s, 60s and 70s. So theory, what they're doing, theory and practice, or praxis go hand in hand. There's one manifesto, and it's a Brazilian filmmaker who was actually, they showed Rui Guerra, who took over the INC, who'd been in Brazil, and then goes back to, 1975, it's the coup in Brazil, goes to Mozambique. But the manifesto, there's a line, and he's kind of like, film must teach people to show them how miserable they are. That's that moment of kind of decolonial filmmaking, which is like, I'm going to tell you how awful things are. There is a pedagogical dimension to that. And I think she shows that. You even get it in the rallies, the mass rallies, Machel says something, then the people kind of repeat. And I don't know what she's trying to convey. I don't know if we should care either. There's Walter Benjamin talks about the author being the last authority of a text, and I think that's really important. I think it's like, with me, the thing about text is like, how does this make you feel? And I think the film is kind of, I think it's very clever. You talked about the kind of narrative. She kind of uses the 10-minute clips and makes a story which actually is kind of manipulates you as a viewer. So you're identifying with, it's a narrative film. Narrative kind of interpolates you, and it uses that narrative form to make you feel, this is great, revolution's fantastic. Oh God, no, now look at, this is awful. And you do feel that. That's why I think like Machel appearing at the end, it's like, oh, now it's back.
Yeah, it also has some sort of universalizing line because it's also about Utopia project in general and about sort of aspects of the utopian project somehow manifesting itself in various.
It sort of made me feel uncomfortable, to be honest. Like there were these Portuguese but Mozambican filmmakers shooting images of Black Mozambicans, and like it felt like it was documentary at certain points, even when it was joy and there was dancing. It felt still like there was a positionality situation going on, and I want to know whether that's just me,
Yeah.
or that's a reading of it, that, you know, by the end they're destitute, and she's sort of, we could call it, you know, valorization of poverty, right, at the end. But at the beginning, you know, there's not that, but there is still some sort of weird power race dimension going on there that, you know, it's like an anthropology of these locals that feels weird.
Well, this is where...
Take it off the chest.
It's actually quite interesting. I'm just thinking of Chile at this moment. The Chilean government produced these like books, because this is all popular culture now, popular culture. Chilean government produced these books at the time, and it was like almost similar to this. It's like Get to Know the Nation. This is Allende, and they're very ethnographic in that way. And I think you're right. The Kuxa Kanema series is very... I don't know if at the beginning it was, because it was all about development. This is what we're doing. You know, here's a hospital that people are constructing. So I don't know if it was if it was ethnographic in that sense. But I mean, to a certain extent as well, it's like, here's Mozambique.
Yeah, but even if it's a hospital that they're constructing, my mind goes directly to labor. So like you have these laborers who are building that hospital and seeing themselves laboring on the screen. That's not, like, that's a weird, it's a not necessarily a positive dynamic in some ways. It's an interesting one to pick apart. But
yeah. Yeah, well, I think there's this because Vivek's talking about kind of white filmmakers filming black people. They were, training. Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Don't know if it was. I mean, I think there is a kind of like, it was training. And you never see, I mean, you do purposely see, they show you who is framing things. So I don't know about that kind of, I mean, there's always a sense of, there's always power when you put the camera. But this was very much about empowering the people as well. In terms of the images of labor, I mean, you have to remember that I mean, it's as if laboring is bad, working is bad, and actually it was the opposite there. No, working for the country and for the nation was actually a really positive thing.
It's a socialist, was sort of the socialist ethic of building together this completely new political body. But I think we could, at this point, maybe move towards the bar, because we turned into the seminar already, sort of, at this point. But thank you so much, Maite. And